This is the WPRO 2018 Election Central Debate Series, the Democrat Gubernatorial Debate with candidates Matt Brown, Spencer Dickinson, and an open invitation to Governor Gina Raimondo. And now, here's your host and moderator, Bill Haberman, on your Election Central headquarters, NewsTalk 99.7 FM and AM 630 WPRO.
And good evening. Welcome to the second of the WPRO Election Central primary debates, the second of three debates. Last week we heard from the Republicans who are running for governor. Coming up next week, we'll hear for the two Democrats who are running for lieutenant governor. That'll be next Wednesday at the same time. But tonight, we make room for the Democrats who are running for governor in Rhode Island. Thank you for joining us. I'm Bill Haberman. Let's get right to it and meet our candidates alphabetically. First, we'll introduce you to Matt Brown. He served a term as Secretary of State, 2003 to 2007, and went on to found the group Global Zero. Mr. Secretary, Mr. Brown, welcome. It's good to see you. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Also introduce former State Representative Spencer Dickinson. He was a member of the General Assembly 1973 through 80, and then in 2010 and 2014. Representative Dickinson, thank you so much for joining us. The incumbent Democrat, Gina Raimondo, declined our invitation, sadly. She is represented, those who are watching us at 630WPRO.com, she's represented by an empty chair, much like Mayor Fun. Unfortunately, that's the case. It's been that way. WPRO is not the only organization which the candidates, incumbent and Republican Alan Fung chose not to join us. We thank Dan York and Andy Gresh for their time. Dan will have a wrap-up of tonight's debate from 6 to 6:30 when we turn things over to sports. Nick Fryer, I believe, is in for Andy Gresh. Our candidates have agreed to a set of rules, and again, time restrictions. We're going to start with opening statements, which are determined by a coin flip, and we are going to start with a opening statement. 1 minute, please. Mr. Dickinson, Spencer Dickinson.
Thank you, Bill. Very good to be here, and I appreciate what you're doing. Appreciate the station making the time for this to happen. You know, just looking at that Gina Raimondo empty chair kind of reminds me of Buddy C. Yancey on the air, and he'd come on, and he'd still be eating a sandwich or something, because I'm on the radio, listening to him in my truck or my car, and he's eating a sandwich, and his guest isn't there yet, so the guest comes running in, sits in the chair, Buddy kind of finishes his sandwich, munches a little bit, and then the show starts. That could happen today. So you're not having a sandwich, but maybe Gina will show up. I have an idea of what I think a debate should be, and I'm hoping we can do that. And it's an interchange between the two candidates. It's not a lightning interview process by two parallel people who happen to be in the room at the same time. So I'm hoping we'll have a chance for me and Matt to go back and forth a little bit, ask some questions and that kind of thing. And hopefully if we do that, we'll all learn something. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. Mr. Brown, opening statement, if you could, please.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I feel that the system we have, the way things are working, isn't working for most people in this state. The costs of things that people need, their health care, their housing, education for their kids, child care, they've all gone through the roof over 40 years, and they're still going through the roof. And wages, meanwhile, have stayed the same, flatlined. And you put those two facts together, and it means that life has gotten harder for people, and it's continuing to get harder for people. And it's going to be harder for their kids unless something changes, and government isn't doing anything about it. And I think the reason government isn't doing anything about it is because our politicians get campaign contributions from Wall Street and wealthy interests in the top 1%. And so they work for them instead of working for the people. And that's what needs to change. I believe government has one job and one job only, and that's to look out for the people. I have spent my life running public service organizations dedicated to solving real problems that people are facing and getting real results, from running City Year in this state that tutors kids in the schools, to being Secretary of State, to running Global Zero that works to make the world safer for people. And that's the kind of work I'll do as governor.
All righty. Before we get to the questions, I'm going to start first with the debate issue that Mr. Dickinson brought up. Let's start with you. What are your thoughts about the two of these candidates, both the governor and the Republican Alan Fung, not here by an empty chair? What are your thoughts about this?
Sorry, the governor.
The governor not participating tonight.
Yeah. I think it's really bad for democracy. I think we've got a long tradition and precedent in this country with American democracy of voters making their case to the people. I think the voters deserve it. I think the candidates owe it to them. Governor Raimondo, I know, said, well, I'm not going to debate because maybe it's not good for my strategy. But the campaign is not about Governor Raimondo. It's not about any of the candidates. It's about the voters. and the voters deserve to see the candidates out from behind the corporate-funded paid ads, talking about our records, talking about our ideas for what we're going to do to solve the problems that people are facing. And to not do that is an insult to the voters, and it's offensive to the whole democratic process.
You mentioned it a little bit. I'm going to ask you as well, Mr. Dickinson. What are your thoughts about the governor not being here tonight and not taking part in any debates here?
Well,
on the
you know,
Democratic
from
side?
this point of view of taking advice from highly paid advisors, she might be doing the right thing. Although, you know, the people are shortchanged. They deserve nothing less than this opportunity to hear us. And if I'm here in 4 years, and you can hold me to this, and I hope I'm sure you're recording this, I'll debate anybody. I'll debate Mickey Mouse. You know, and I've always had that policy. When I was a state representative, if I was the incumbent and somebody else was proposing to run against me, I'll appear with them anywhere, no problem. You know, and I want to say this is sort of like a job interview, and she's not here. I mean, how do you get a job? And you know, the job we're the candidates for that job. We're the people that are applying for the job. And you and the people of Rhode Island and the voters are the employer.
So we're going to get you down
here.
on record. You will do. We didn't
Of
get
course.
Mr. Brown. Governor Brown, 4 years from now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
And
you will do this if you find
Yes,
yourself in a
yes.
similar position.
yeah, absolutely. And I also, sorry, were you still?
Well, you know, I just want to say a little bit more about that. So let's, you know, I would like the listeners to see this as a job interview. You're here, Bill, and you're going to ask some questions. But, you know, let's consider it that way. Let's look at some factors. And I present the fact I've been here for a while. I've addressed all these issues. I think Matt expresses well some of what the issues are. He's right about what those issues are. I know that. We all know that. I've had experience in dealing with those issues. I know the details, and I've been here. So that's an important point.
So we're
that
on
I'm
record.
making
We're on record.
as a
Everybody is going to
candidate.
come here if they're in a similar
Yeah,
position.
absolutely. And I think we also have to ask the question, why is it that someone running for governor, Governor Raimondo in this case, wouldn't want to have an opportunity and a platform to speak to the voters of the state in a debate format? And I think you've got to wonder, what is it about her record over the last 4 years? What is it about her way of governing that she feels is not a positive to talk about with the voters? And I think it's been a record that has not been good for the people of the state. I think it's been good for corporations, but not good for the people. And that may be why she doesn't want to be here tonight talking.
Okay, let's get to the questions. And we're going to talk a little bit about the governor is not here in the empty chair. The first question is going to
We'll
be
work
for
that
you,
in.
Mr. Dickinson, and we're going to ask about that. One of the things Dan Yorker's generally city in our time has talked about in the past, the current administration doesn't, I think as he put it, doesn't block and tackle very well. Let's start with the tax refund issue, which was something that came up. There was no warning to the taxpayers. Many people waited months for that. Let's talk about UHIP. That's been very, very well chronicled. Even last week, the Washington Bridge, which was corrected, but clearly was put into place without a lot of forethought. The basics. Let me ask you about the basics. We don't seem to do the basics very well in Rhode Island, Mr. Dickinson. What are your thoughts about that? Are we going to do the basics well if you're
Under
elected
my
governor?
administration, it'll be a lot different. You know, I have served an apprenticeship, and I think anybody that takes on any job, you've got to have some experience. You got to bring something. Gina brings two things. Number one, or maybe three things, some great educational credentials. So let's just set those aside, because if I'm doing a job interview, I don't care. I want to know what you've done and what you can do. So what she's doing wrong is she's making wrong decisions, and this is something, they're bad decisions, and unfortunately our legislature is doing the same thing. So they're supposed to check each other, but they don't. The other thing that Gina brings is an absolute lack of experience. She did not serve a couple of years in the Army, and let me tell you something, you learn a lot, which I did. She didn't work as a systems analyst at Prudential Insurance. She didn't work as a systems analyst at Citizens Bank in Providence. So when she goes down to UHIP, if she goes at all, she doesn't even know what she's looking at. You've got to be able to go down, and I don't care if you're the CEO of a big company or the CEO of the state of Rhode Island. You've got to be able to go down there to the front line and say, what's that flow chart you're working on? And if somebody tells you that there are 500 employees, 500 coders who've been working on that problem since a year ago last October, you can't, if you've ever been one of those coders, if you've ever been in an operation like that, you're going to say to yourself, what are they talking about? And $650 million, what's that about? And then add, you know, just as a parallel example, which is on a much smaller scale, a $20 million project at the Registry of Motor Vehicles, which has taken about 9 years and produced zero. Somebody's got to be able to be the executive that looks at that and says, something's not going to work here. And I'll draw a comparison between the bridge and if you know anything about Apponaug, all the circles down there, somebody's got to look at that plan. All you have to do is spend a couple of minutes at the, at motor vehicles or at the highway department every month and say, that's crazy. We're not going to do that. We're not going to spend $80 million building rotaries in Apponaug, ruining the city, using up 100 acres, and building something that we're going to have to tear down in 10 years and use up money that we could have spent doing something important.
Doing the basics, Mr.
Yeah,
Brown. We don't do them very well here. It seems at times anyway.
Yeah, and it's caused a lot of harm to the people of the state. It's caused a lot of harm to the people's pocketbooks in the state. It's cost a lot of money. And I think we're better than this. I think Rhode Island is better than this. I think Rhode Islanders deserve better than this. So let's look at it. Let's look at some of them. So UHIP. What happened with UHIP is that the federal government and the state inspector general warned Governor Raimondo specifically that the UHIP system, the new system for delivering these services, wasn't ready to launch. And she launched it anyway. And at the same time, she cut 40% of the staff there who had experience, and the system broke, and it's still broken. And the result is that tens of thousands of Rhode Islanders went hungry and without health care. And the bill is now up to $650 million for the project. It was supposed to save money. So part of leadership is making good decisions. Part of it is being there, not being out of state, fundraising and focused on that, but being here to govern the state. And ultimately, it's about being responsible. And I've been running organizations my whole life, and the person in charge at the top, the buck stops with them, and they've got to take responsibility and solve the problem.
I think we're in agreement, Mr. Dickinson. The basics are not getting done well right now.
There's a lot of truth to that. But, again, let's picture this as an interview. We're sitting around the table. We got a couple of candidates here, and the rest of the people are the voters of Rhode Island. And one of the things, if I'm one of those voters, I'm going to look at the two candidates, me and the man across the table here, and I'm going to say, why did you leave your last job? And what have you actually done? Have you actually, I understand you're explaining to me what the problem is, but what do you bring in terms of being able to do something about this in the future? And I'll give you one example right now. Take UHIP, for example. There is an organization called SEI, Systems Engineering Institute. It's at Carnegie Mellon. And I say this every time I get near a microphone. Gina should call them tomorrow, get them down here to evaluate that problem, set up some guideposts, and make some recommendations. That's just not being done.
Let's move on. Next question from Matt Brown. This again will be about the incumbent, who is unfortunately not here, and an empty chair, which again you can see on 630WPRO.com. Certainly, if anything, the incumbent is a prodigious fundraiser, and that matters. What are your thoughts? How much is enough? What are your thoughts about the amount of money that has been raised by the incumbent in this race?
Well, the problem with the fundraising is what underlies it. And what the fundraising is about in our system is corporations, the wealthiest at the top, and Wall Street buying influence, wielding influence over our government, so that politicians work for the interests of the very wealthiest, Wall Street, and large corporations, because that's where they get their campaign funding from. And that's a broken system. That the whole point of democracy is that our government is working for the people. It's working to solve the problems that they are dealing with, not working for the corporations and the wealthiest 1% and Wall Street. This is a system that Governor Raimondo didn't create, but she is right at the center of it. She believes in it. She's taken it to an extreme, and I think it's a big part of the reason that in this state, middle class and working class people have been left to struggle. They've been ignored by their government, while our government's giving handouts to corporations, Governor Raimondo giving her hand-picked handouts to corporations who are often her corporate donors. And that is taking money from the taxpayers of this state and just continuing to shift it to the corporations who already have all the money in the world. So the system is broken. It needs to be changed. We need leaders who understand that government has one job. It's the simplest job description in the world, which is to look out for the people and only the people. I've spent my whole life running public service organizations dedicated to serving the people, strengthening our communities, solving problems, making the world safer, and that's what I'll do as governor of Rhode Island.
Thoughts on the governor's fundraising, Mr. Dickinson?
She supposedly has raised $7 million for this campaign. And this is a chance for the people. And I've told people my campaign is going to be the price of a new truck, and you're going to see some ads on this station. But that's not a whole lot. And I think the point is, I like interviewers who ask me the question, and they don't say, where do you stand in the polls, or how much money do you have in your campaign account? I like it when they say, let's find out what kind of a governor you'd make. I think we can maybe all change the media's approach to some of these things. And it should be about the content of your character and not the content of your campaign fund. So, but it's not working because she spent a couple $1 million and she's a little nervous because it's not moving the needle. It's not working.
Mr. Brown, thoughts again? Wrap on the fundraising.
Yeah, it's because I believe that this corrupting influence of money in our system is so harmful that I don't take any corporate PAC money, any corporate lobbyist money, any fossil fuel money. I mean, look, I'll give you one example. Governor Raimondo took campaign contributions from executives at the Invenergy Corporation and then announced to the state of Rhode Island that we're going to, quote, do everything we can to make sure they're successful in building a fracked gas plant in Rhode Island that will pollute the state, be bad for climate change, be bad for the economy because it'll keep us in the past with the fossil fuel economy. And the only ones that are good for Invenergy Corporation, who's going to would make a mint off the people of the state, and Governor Raimondo, who took campaign contributions from them. That connection between money and government has got to end.
Gotcha. Let's move on. Question now from Mr. Dickinson. Apologies for what you just said right now. But there are those who say that a vote for you is taking away votes for Mr. Brown, that a vote for you is a vote for Gina Raimondo. How do you address that fact of the spoiler factor? You're not the only candidate on both sides here where that allegation has come up. But is not a vote for you a vote for Governor Raimondo?
I'll tell you how I see it. I indicated my interest in being a candidate last October. And at that time, my recollection of Mr. Brown was not a favorable one because he left here 12 years ago under a huge cloud, which I'd like to see more about, and I'd like to raise that issue myself. And even if I'm objective, I see him come back. This scares the heck out of me. It surprises me. And then I find out he's going to run as an independent, and I turn on my, I look at a video of him explaining why it's a good idea to be an independent, and then pretty soon he's a Democrat. So from my point of view, maybe last in, first out, because, I've been in this race, and I was here, I've been 12 years in the legislature, and these issues that we're talking about, such as the pension reform, I lived those issues. I know the details. I know the specifics. And in terms of, say, alternate energy, I built the first solar heated house because I was trying to prove that the Rome Point nuclear power plant was a bad idea. The electric company spent $600,000 trying to say that what we were doing wasn't good. I've been there. And it surprises me when somebody shows up and says all the things I'm saying. So for this job interview, I'm asking you as an employer to say, let's hire the guy that's got some experience. So the idea that I should drop out, I just don't get it. And, and I'm a little bit wary of people that I would call charismatic candidates. And you can take Buddy Cianci. I kind of liked Buddy, but you got Napoleon, you got leaders in World War II that were charismatic. Whenever I see somebody kind of sweep through and pick up a whole bunch of following, I start to ask questions. And to be honest with you, my questions have not been asked by the media from Mr. Brown, and I haven't had a chance to ask my questions. I hope to get that chance today.
Mr. Brown, is the vote for Mr. Dickinson a vote for Governor Raimondo? What are your thoughts about that? Are you the only one in this race?
Look, I think, just like we were talking about the fact that it's an important part of democracy is debating. An important part of democracy is that people who want to run for office should be able to run for office. I think it's an open system, and it's up to the voters in the end. I've been working my whole life in communities doing public service work. My mother was a social justice and civil rights activist and activist for children's health, and she took me out ever since I was a little kid to do that kind of work. And I started on my own with co-founding and leading City Year, where we tutored kids in schools. We've now tutored thousands of children in the schools across the state. That program served as the model for AmeriCorps, where we've now engaged 1 million young Americans in serving their country. So I've been doing work for my whole life in communities here, and also working to make the world a safer place and protect people from harm, especially our children. And that's the kind of work I want to continue to do as governor.
Thank you for your flexibility, by the way. You reject the notion, Mr. Dickinson, that a vote for Spencer Dickinson is a vote for Gina Raimondo.
Well, we got 2 weeks left, and a lot can happen in 2 weeks. I've worked in a lot of campaigns, and I've seen them go from 0 to 60 in 2 or 3 weeks. So I don't think it's over by any means. And I've got a few things to say, and I think Mr. Brown has a few things to answer for, and I think the voters need to hear all of that before they decide. And I have to say, I don't really think it's fair to say I should back out. I don't. And by the way, if you want somebody to back out, you pick the wrong guy. And I said I've been in the legislature a total of 12 years. I've been with these issues. I've worked on the pension issue. I was in the middle of that. I was in the middle of the 38 studios. I wasn't there when it was voted, but I tried to deal with finding out what was going on. I understand these issues. I'm the guy that you should have. And to ask me to walk away with what I know about that, to take my experience and just leave, I just don't think that makes sense.
Let's move on. Next question is going to be from Mr. Brown. I think this was alluded to. It was chronicled in your 2006 campaign for Senate that you left under a cloud under the race in regard to your your campaign financing. Some might say that it's tough to listen to your criticism of Governor Raimondo's fundraising in light of the way that your campaign ended in 2006. Can you address that issue, please? With the end of your campaign, and again, that you moved on quickly from Rhode Island to, your next effort. But it's some would say, hey, you're bringing up fundraising. What about your fundraising in 2006?
Yeah, well, that was a Republican attack brought against me in that campaign. The FEC looked at that, the Federal Elections Commission, and they dismissed it as, quote, having no basis. And so I went on from there to, obviously, was Secretary of State for 4 years. And in that role, took on the corporate lobbyists, which at that point were in the State House, wielding influence, spending money, going to meetings, and not reporting it. And we enforced the rules and made them report that and made that the government more transparent and accountable for the people. And then I went on to co-found and lead Global Zero, which is an organization that brought leaders together around the world, worked to get governments together at the table to reduce nuclear arms. We pushed for a number of treaties that were successful. We were nominated twice for the Nobel Peace Prize, and the organization is still going strong. So that's to answer the first question. The other question about how I've spent my life and the work that I've done. So I grew up in Providence, worked in community since I was a kid.
But in regard though to the issue of your campaign fundraising, you say that you didn't do anything wrong.
Oh,
because it's certainly the coinciding the end of your campaign and that issue kind of came together.
Yeah,
your campaign for Senate, it was a Senate campaign. It wasn't a Secretary of State, and it was at the end of your tenure as Secretary of State.
That's correct, right? No, and as I said, that was an attack from the Republican Party lodged against me. It's not just that I said we didn't do anything wrong. It's that the FEC looked at it and determined that there was no basis, quote, no basis for those allegations and dismissed it. So I went on to co-found and lead Global Zero, which has done the work that I've talked about, which was, difficult work around the world that got real results that have made the world safer, protected people from harm, including people, of course, here in Rhode Island, and most importantly, our children. And that's the kind of work I want to continue to do as governor.
Mr. Dickinson, on this issue in regard to Mr. Brown's campaign in 2006, in regard to fundraising, vis-a-vis his criticism of Governor Raimondo's fundraising.
I can't, sometimes I hear him criticizing her, and I just kind of try to look into his mind, and I hear him saying to himself, I can't believe I'm getting away with this. And I don't believe, I've been around a long time, as I said, 12 years in the legislature, a couple of years in the Army, had my own business for a long time, worked in big businesses. I don't believe everything I hear. And to me, his report of what happened is not what I recall in the newspaper. It's not what I saw, and it doesn't square with what's happening today. There are a couple of other high-profile cases, and at the proper time, I would like to ask him how his case compares to them. And I'd also like journalism in the state of Rhode Island to step up and answer these questions. And if I'm wrong, I want to read about it.
Gotcha. Did you learn anything from that episode to wrap up this section of the question?
Yes, as I said at the time, what we did was allowed under the FEC. It created a political problem, and so that was a mistake. And it's fully my responsibility. The campaign was unsuccessful, but I've been running and leading organizations for 25 years, from City Year, the National Service Program, to serving as Secretary of State, to running Global Zero, and all of those have been very successful public service organizations. And I look forward to bringing the kind of leadership that I brought to solving those difficult problems to the office of governor to serve the state and help address the serious problems that people are facing here.
Gotcha. Gentlemen, we've hit the halfway point. You're listening to Matt Brown, who is with us. This voice of Matt Brown, Spencer Dickinson as well. This is the WPRO Election Central Primary Debates. The Democrats running for governor. Unfortunately, Governor Raimondo chose not to join us, and she's represented by the empty chair. We'll take a break. We'll get the very latest news, traffic, and weather. Paul Zangari is in the Revolution Soft Wash News Center. Paul?
So we do a couple of minutes of...
We're going to do
On WPRO, Spencer Dickinson saying by sitting out the debate, Governor Raimondo skipping a job interview, and Matt Brown saying her non-appearance is bad for democracy, even if it might be the good advice of her paid consultants. The State Education Commissioner issues a memo today, backed by the governor, saying the only individuals to be allowed to carry firearms on school grounds, visibly identifiable law enforcement. No exceptions for civilians with concealed carry permits. And people streaming in for a second day to pay their respects to Aretha Franklin as she lies in repose in the rotunda of a Detroit African American History Museum. Fans queuing festively outside, then walking solemnly in single file into the museum. WPRO Sports, the Red Sox host the Marlins tonight. The Paw Sox host Lehigh Valley. And about an hour from now, the Yankees are hosting the White Sox with coverage beginning on sister station AM 790 at that time. From the Seascape Lawn Care Weather Center, AccuWeather meteorologist Kerry Schwindenhammer says the heat advisory stays into effect until 9 tonight, and it will be a partly cloudy, very warm and humid night with a low of 75. Partly sunny tomorrow. Again, hot and humid. A shower or thunderstorm in the afternoon. High 90. The real field temperatures back near 100 tomorrow afternoon. Mostly cloudy tomorrow night. A little more comfortable, low 67. And Friday, a cloudy, cooler day, less humid with a high of 76. Currently, we have 93 degrees here at the weather station. And Rich Teeter has our latest look at traffic.
From the WPRO Traffic Center, here's your trusted choice insurance agent's regional traffic.
Well, things pretty good through downtown Providence. A little bit sluggish as you come through. That's to be expected on 95 north and south. We did get word of a crash, 146 at 95 on the southbound side of both. So you're going to see a little bit of a backup there. Looking like it's backing up on 146 back to about Branch Ave right now. 6 eastbound, a little bit hung up as you come in. Got word of a crash on 95 southbound just ahead of 37, causing a backup to Route 10 in Cranston. And you're still slow as you go by 37 on 295 north. With your trusted choice insurance agents regional right now traffic, I'm Rich Teeter on WPRO.
We now return to the WPRO 2018 Election Central Debate Series, the Democrat Gubernatorial Debate on NewsTalk 99.7 FM and AM 630 WPRO.
Good evening. Welcome back to the WPRO Election Central primary debates. This is the Democratic debate. This is the second of three debates. We're joined by the Democrats who are running for governor tonight. Former Secretary of State Matt Brown, who has joined us. Spencer Dickinson, former state representative, is with us. Unfortunately, the incumbent Democrat Gina Raimondo chose not to be with us, and she is represented by the empty chair. I'm going to move on to the section of our debate where the candidates ask questions of each other. We're going to start with Mr. Dickinson. If you can ask a question of Mr. Brown. The candidates have agreed in advance, by the way. Our questions are going to stick to matters of public record and policy and away from personal attack. You're both gentlemen, obviously, so go right ahead. Mr. Dickinson.
Okay, well, you know, the introduction to this is something that you mentioned a little earlier in the first half hour, which is, you know, how do I feel about the fact that by being in the race, I and Matt might split a vote, which would defeat Raimondo. And of course, what she's done in betraying people and betraying state workers and teachers is huge. So of course, it's very important for her to be defeated. But at the same time, I have some questions. I mean, you know, I'm not the kind of person that walks away. I've never walked away from anything. So in order for me to let's
get to the question for Mr. Brown.
All right, maybe the setup's a little too long. I tend to do
let's
that.
get right to the
I have no
question.
sense of time. I have here a transcript of what happens to be something that Dan York played the other night, and it was the comments by Robert Kazami, and he was talking about the plea that Cohen made in New York. This is very recent, and here are some interesting things that he said. These are serious charges and reflect a pattern of lies and dishonesty over an extended period of time, significant in their own right, particularly significant when done by a lawyer who through training and tradition understands what it means to be a lawyer. And it goes on.
I need you to ask a question.
And the point is that Kazami had gotten a plea on essentially campaign finance laundering, which is a federal felony, and he says that Cohen will do some time.
Please ask the question.
My question to candidate Brown is, why did what did you do, and what made it any different from what Cohen did, and early before him what Dinesh D'Souza did? What is the difference? I don't see it, and I'd like to know.
Sure. Well, so as I said, the issue you're talking about were attacks made by me in the middle of a campaign by the Republican Party.
What does the party who makes the attacks have to do with
Mr.
it?
Dickinson, let him please answer.
Okay.
You'll have a chance to rebut him, please.
Well, they were political attacks. So the Federal Elections Commission looked at it and determined that there was, quote, no basis for the allegations and dismissed it. So and that's all been discussed quite a bit. So for me, I think that when I go around the state, what I hear from people is that the way things are going for them isn't working at all. They are angry. Some of them feel like giving up. Some of them have lost hope because it has been decades that things have been going in decline in this state and people have been struggling. And many times they have been made promises by politicians that things were going to change and they haven't changed. So I'm focused entirely on listening to what people are facing, listening to what the challenges are in their lives in this campaign, and putting forward ideas that I believe can actually get to the roots of these problems. And I think we need everybody that we possibly can get together to work on these problems to do it. I think that's the kind of leadership that we need. That's what I think this campaign needs to be about. That's what I believe democracy needs to be about. I think if we can do that and we can focus on the challenges that people are facing and the solutions that we need to put forward, from what we're going to do to lower the cost of healthcare, to finally make our schools good for every kid in this state, to creating jobs that pay wages so that people can make a life here. That's what I want to focus on in this campaign. Those are the things I've worked on my whole life since I was a running city here in communities in Rhode Island, and that's what I want to do as governor.
Mr. Dickinson.
So if your question to me is, did candidate Brown just answer my question, I have to say no. And if you'll excuse me, read a little further. I'll try to make it brief. D'Souza attempted to illegally contribute over $10,000 to a Senate campaign, willfully undermining the integrity of the campaign finance process. Like many others before him of all political stripes, he has had to answer for his crime here with a felony conviction. Those are the words of the great New York prosecutor, Preet Bharara. I have not been shown the difference between what Matt Brown did and what Dinesh D'Souza did. And I need to see that before I will put any confidence in him. Of course the issues he's raising are valid. I know that because I've been fighting for those issues for years. I've been here while he was 11 years in Washington doing I don't know what, collecting $300,000 a year from a very questionable organization, which we don't know anything about. And the governor has raised that issue, but then kind of quieted down. I'm not satisfied.
Mr. Brown, you said you didn't answer the question.
Yeah, well, no, I did. I said that the FEC looked at this and dismissed it. But I will say this, if you want to, or Governor Raimondo, I know this is something she's been focused on and sent out a mailer about. I know maybe all of you got it. There it is, putting my head kind of next to Trump's. So this attack on Global Zero is absurd, and it's really outrageous that Governor Raimondo has launched. This is a charitable nonprofit organization that has worked to make the world safer and reduce nuclear arms, that had the backing of President Obama, that was nominated twice for the Nobel Peace Prize. And I think for Governor Raimondo to attack an organization whose entire mission is to protect people, especially to protect children and future generations from harm, to score political points, is reckless. And there's no place for that, in my view, in politics. I think we should be focused entirely on the problems that people are facing and what our ideas are to solve those problems.
Gotcha. Mr. Brown, let's stay with you. A question from Mr. Dickinson, please, if you could.
Yeah, I was told that we could ask questions of the empty chair.
The empty chair is there as well.
So I think I think it's important. I think we both want to make clear that there is an empty chair here, and that the incumbent governor has refused to join us in this important debate. So the question I would ask, I've got a question about the PAWSOX. I would put this in the category of what we were talking about earlier about that you raised, Bill, about UHIP and just not doing the basic things right in leadership. So we lost the PAWSOX. It's really sad for many of us across the state. I played baseball. I'm a little league coach for my son for the last number of years here in Fox Point, where I played. We always took the kids out to PAWSOX after.
Let me get you
so
to
the
ask
question is
questions,
this.
yes.
The question is this. It's a big loss for the state. And we learned a few days ago from a press conference that from Mayor Grebien of Pawtucket that Governor Raimondo never brought together, not once, all of the key players for that deal. The Senate leadership, the House leadership, herself, and the leaders of the Paw Sox. Never once, he said, were they in the same room together.
And again, the question is...
And the question for Governor Raimondo, if she's listening, we'd love to hear an answer. Why not? At Global Zero, the whole mission was to get governments
that's the question.
to the table.
Why not? The governor's not here. We can
Okay.
show again the governor's empty chair. Mr.
All right.
Dickinson, you are here. Your thoughts on the Paw Sox and handling it. Mr. Brown's question, the governor's not here to
And
answer.
when I
you.
say that I would do it differently, I'm speaking from actual experience, my own experience as a businessman. Of course she did it wrong. She did nothing. She needed to sit down with Larry Lucchino and find out what the best deal was, and then she needed to bring it to the people, put it, if it was a bond issue, put it on the ballot, which is exactly where the problem many people will remember. Moral obligation bonds, 38 studios, that was the problem. There is no such thing as a moral obligation bond. Likewise, those bonds that they invented in the House at the last minute, those bonds were not a real thing. They were going to cost too much. That program was doomed. But the big problem was she needed to sit down and make and work that out, all the cards on the table, and then show them to the people. Maybe they wouldn't have passed it. I think they would have. Pawtucket needed this, and it's a terrible shame to lose the Paw Sox. If I can just follow up on something, I've been hearing a lot about Global Zero. We need to learn more about it, but I've got a comparable experience where I worked for World Peace. It was called being in the United States Army. It was a very difficult time in my life, but I volunteered for it. And the unit I was with was the 5th Mechanized Division, and our job was to prevent nuclear war, and we did it. And, so let's, not just consider that there's one approach to this, and everything you need to know about the Army, but I don't think we know anything about Global Zero or why they can pay their chief executive $300,000 a year or where their money comes from. And I'm asking journalists out there, if there are any listening, let's find out. Don't make me do all the work.
Mr. Brown, there's a couple issues there. You can take it as you will.
Sure. I would just say again that, I think a political attacks, which I know Governor Raimondo started, against a charitable nonprofit organization whose mission is to reduce nuclear arms. And by the way, I have enormous respect for your service and for what you did to make the world a safer place. Global Zero is working for the same thing. And we had a lot of actually military commanders who were part of it, as well as former presidents and prime ministers around the world who put forward plans to try to reduce nuclear arms and successfully pushed for treaties to do that. I think Global Zero's a very transparent organization. The major donors are listed on the website. But I think the key issue here is that attacks on an organization like this for political purposes, I think, is not what we need to be doing. I think what we need to be doing is focusing on the problems that we have in this state. I think the record of the empty chair here, Governor Raimondo, to solve those problems, in fact, I think often to make them worse by taking money from the taxpayers of this state and giving them to hand-picked corporations as handouts. That's not real economic development, and it hurts the working and middle-class people of this state.
Last word on this topic here. We've got a couple of topics on the table.
What he just said is an example of something which happens to be true, although my question is, what does he know about it? Yes, we have, Gordon Fox put through 38 studios. It's given our state a terrible reputation. It scares people away. We are a pay-to-play state. That's why big companies don't come here. That's why the governor has to buy jobs at $80,000 a piece to bring companies here. I would change the name of the Commerce Corp back to Economic Development, and people would come here, and we don't bribe them to show up. But one of the things we're going to do is we're going to make sure that it's not a pay-to-play state. And if anybody asks somebody for tells them to hire a certain law firm or a certain engineering firm, we're going to find out about that. We're going to put an end to it. You change this from a pay-to-play state, that opens up a whole new range of business people around this country who would consider coming here, and they will.
Next question for Mr. Brown. Mr. Dickinson, we'll stay with you. The second question for Matt Brown, please.
If it's all right with you, I'd like to continue. I'd like to shift over. We're talking about the empty chair. And, normally I don't agree with much that Gina Raimondo says, but I think these points are very valid.
Let's try again to get it in the form of a question here. I almost feel like Alex Trebek.
So my question is there any validity to this? For when Brown ran for U.S. Senate, the Providence Journal said he ran a near-bankrupt campaign. What's that all about? A federal enforcement agency fined Brown for not reporting nearly $150,000 in debt. I don't know what that means. She may be double-talking. How much was the fine?
In regard to the fine, I need you to ask a question. Let's wrap it up with the question.
How much was the fine?
There you go. The question is there, Mr. Brown.
There was no fine for that.
So she's lying.
So there was a fine of $1,000 because we voluntarily updated our finance reports when we got new information from vendors. But again, I think there were attacks from Governor Raimondo are largely an effort to distract from her record. So let's talk about the finances of the state, which I think matters very much to the people of this state. UHIP alone, we covered that. That's two-thirds of $1 billion tab for that broken system because she launched it when it wasn't ready, even though she was warned it wasn't ready. When she cut pensions drastically for police, fire, state workers, teachers, she then took, and that was those cuts were unnecessary, by the way. I've talked to experts here, Tom Segoras, experts around the country. There were some things that needed to be done to shore up the pension system, but those drastic sudden cuts were not necessary, and it hurt a lot of people and is still hurting people in this state. Then on top of that, she took the pension fund and invested it in high-risk hedge funds and high-fee hedge funds that essentially, because it performed badly, lost about $500 million for the pension, and then we paid $215 million in hedge fund fees. So that was another $750 million that her fiscal mismanagement stuck the state with. And so I've committed to doing what we can to make that right, which means getting a COLA back for the pensioners who lost it. It was taken from them. They paid into that system. It was their money. It was a guarantee. They made life decisions based on that. And what was done was wrong and unnecessary, and we need to make it right.
Mr. Dickinson, your reply.
Was that a question from him?
He was responding to a question you posed to him.
Okay, well, so maybe your question is, am I satisfied with his response? And, I know what plea bargaining is. I know what happens when people strike a deal not to be prosecuted for something. Talk to people in law enforcement. It happens all the time. They recognize it when they see it. They can see it from a distance. And it looks to me as though that's what happened. And I need to be convinced. Somebody has raised the issue that I should back out, even though I was the first candidate, even though I'm the one that's been here for the last X number of years when all these issues were being fought out with me, so paying the price of fighting for them. He was in Washington doing I don't know what. So it's, in effect, I'm not satisfied with his answers, and maybe we'll hear him off the air, but I think that those questions are standing, and I'm just going to say, I don't believe you. I'm sorry.
Matt Brown.
Okay, that's just going a little too far. There was no, all of that implication was just not true. I think we've covered this ground, but do I get my second question for Governor Raimondo?
You're still rebutting right here. So.
Oh yeah, no, that's it.
We're still wrapping up here. This question. He said, he said you didn't answer the question.
Which one now?
That's in regard to your campaign.
Oh no, I answered it I think several times. The issue was dismissed by the FEC. There's none of that. Those issues we're raising are true in that last bit. And again, I do think that look, there are negative flyers coming out. There are probably going to be more. I believe, the sense I get is that my campaign is doing well. We got a lot of support. This was a negative attack we saw from Governor Raimondo. A lot of people received this in Rhode Island. I think it's a sign that support for her is waning, and I think people are looking for an alternative. They're looking for a different candidate with a different vision who's going to work for the people of the state and not work for corporations and Wall Street and the wealthiest 1%. I think people have had it with that way, and I think they're looking for new leadership.
Let's stay with you, Matt Brown.
Okay.
One more question for Spencer Dickinson.
I'm actually going to give. I want to keep drawing some focus to this empty chair here, and I'm
feeling left out.
I hope that Governor Raimondo is listening to this. So this is a question about what happened on I-95 recently.
195.
Yeah, 195. Yeah. Excuse me. So the first problem, in my view, was that clearly this, like UHIP, was a project that the governor rushed through. There was just a lack of planning and a lack of leadership. And people had their lives really turned upside down, trying to get to work, trying to get their kids to school. Then it was made worse when she suddenly tried to fix it because of the bad press. And we had the disaster of the nighttime traffic jam, and I had phone calls from friends who were stuck in that. My question is this: where was she? Why didn't she come out and speak to the people and take responsibility, which to me is the essence of leadership? You have to be responsible to the people. So
why was she
why didn't she come out when this problem happened, speak to the people and tell them what she was going to do to solve the problem. She was nowhere to be seen.
The governor obviously is represented by an empty chair. Unfortunately, Mr. Dickinson, your thoughts, the 195 project in regard to the administration's handling.
It's a good example of weak and inept leadership on her part, and her focus clearly is the fundraising and, in effect, taking money from working people in Rhode Island, teachers and state employees, and moving that money to Wall Street. We understand what happened. It was clearly a question of giving huge amounts of money, and my opponent here is correct about the amounts. It was somewhere around the neighborhood of $750 million. Her friends profited. There was a sense of deep betrayal on the part of state employees and teachers. They suffered. They're suffering now. But I don't want to continue that by failing to have an executive, an alternative to Gina, who understands what the problem was, lived it, and it's more than just reading the Cliff Notes and talking about it, which is what I get from my opponent who's here today. If I were down at the other end of the table interviewing candidates, I'd want to know, what was your last job? What part did you play in this? What's your actual experience? Are you talking about what you know about, or are you talking about something that where you hired somebody from Kansas to come in here and write you a briefing paper? So I'm proposing that we hire somebody that's been there, understands that. I was there the night of November 17th when this terrible pension bill, which just basically took money from hardworking teachers and state employees. I put in an amendment which would have proved that the state was breaking the law. Interestingly enough, go back and look at the House Journal for that day. You'll find there's no LC number. I'm getting kind of detailed here, but Gordon Fox essentially erased the record because they didn't want to go to court with the evidence that they'd have from the amendment that I put in. So I understand these issues at a very profound level, and I don't think that I want somebody to take over a big corporation and run it without some knowledge of how those things operate, how they work.
Mr. Brown, on 195 again.
Yeah, on 195, as I said, it was when you are leading a state, when you are the governor, you've got to feel the responsibility, in my view. I've run organizations my whole life, and I've always felt the responsibility to the people that I am serving. You have to feel it when you go to bed. You've got to feel it when you get up in the morning. It's got to be something you carry around with you all the time. And when you feel that responsibility, and there's a difficult challenge, you've got to come before the people and that you're serving and say, here's what's gone wrong. Here's why. I am going to get on top of this right now. We're going to solve this problem. People, if there's something wrong, like what happened with the traffic, people go from anger to despair if they don't see anybody in charge and no one taking responsibility and somebody blaming and someone deflecting responsibility. So, and I think that's what happened there, and I think that's why people are so upset about it, as they rightly should. And so I would be a leader who walks around every day feeling responsible to serving the interests and the needs of the people of the state.
Mr. Brown says the governor was MIA, Mr. Dickinson.
I would like to know at what point candidate Brown came back to Rhode Island after his 11 years in Washington. And I'm kind of wondering, I don't expect an answer on this, but I'd like to know where he got the briefings, because he didn't see any of this happen himself. He's new. And he left the state, and probably because he had to. I think there was some kind of a deal made. Maybe I can't prove it, but it sure looks like it, because there were three things that that happened. He pulled out of the campaign against White House. He endorsed White House. He left town. That looks to me like a deal. I wasn't in the room, but that's when he left, and I want to know, when did you come back? Was it 3 weeks ago? Was it 3 months ago?
6 years ago. So I know you've now, we're getting into Governor Raimondo's playbook. A lot of which is just not accurate. So I grew up in Providence, worked in communities in Providence and around the state since I was a kid, working on tough issues. Went to college for 4 years, came back, and helped to start City Year Rhode Island, which I then ran. I was there for about 5 years, and we worked to solve serious problems in communities. I was out on the courts. They used to have a program called Midnight Basketball.
So you're saying you didn't parachute back into the state as much?
I'm saying
let's wrap up, because this is the end
sure.
wind down to this.
Sure. I've spent my whole life working in communities across the state. I went to law school for 3 years. I came back and was elected Secretary of State and served the state of Rhode Island for 4 years. I went to Washington with my family for 4 years to help co-found Global Zero, and moved back to the state 6 years ago. And of course, are raising our kids here. We have a daughter Ella 12, and a son Walker who's 10, and look forward to continuing to serve as governor.
Let's we have one last question before closing statements. Let's talk about the issue of progressiveness, for lack of a better term. You both represent at least candidates who are on the edge of the progressive. There was a massive upset last night in Florida where Mayor Tallahassee, I believe it was. I'll start. The question I think goes, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, is that going to happen here in Rhode Island? I mean, we saw what happened in the primary.
Are we going to see an upset, in
well,
other
words? We saw
you know,
what happened.
Way,
we saw what happened in Florida
whoever
last
may or
night.
may not be a progressive, I have a Bernie bumper sticker. I'm in favor of universal health care, and I've fought for a lot of the things in the General Assembly that maybe other people like Matt Brown would advocate. I was there fighting for him. But I don't know. You know, I don't think the Progressive Party or the Progressive Organization would let me in the door. So I'm not sure that I could be called a progressive. You know, I have owned several businesses, and I understand that, and I understand how things work. So I'm not really sure it's 100% fair. The question is there going to be an upset? You know, I think that's possible. From what I hear, Gina Raimondo is very nervous about the outcomes. She spends a lot of money. She can't move the needle. And I wouldn't be surprised to see an upset. And it might even be a 1-2-3 with her not being the first person at all. That could happen. In other words, somebody says, you know, one of the two of us here should pull out. And, you know, that may be true. And again, I kind of resent the idea that I'm the one being asked to pull out with all the things that have been brought up here today. And again, convince me that I'm wrong about some of those things, and I'll keep an open mind about it, although I am not a quitter. But people have been betrayed, and they've been hurt badly. The teachers, the state employees, especially if you say you retired 10 years ago, your paycheck, without the COLA that you were promised, that you made a career decision on, you are actually hurt by this. And Gina Raimondo did it, and she took all the money to hedge fund managers. But the thing is that betrayal, people today feel they've been betrayed. They don't know who to trust. They don't know who to turn to. And I think that's what we see out there. And when you see that, don't be surprised if something happens that you're not expecting.
What are your thoughts about that, Matt Brown? What we saw last night? What we saw in the primary 2 years ago when Bernie Sanders won here in Rhode Island? In 2 weeks, is it going to happen again?
I certainly think we're on track for that. I mean, I've been running a grassroots campaign here for months. It's a campaign based on talking to Rhode Islanders, which I think is how democracy ought to work. It's not just the paid ads. It's getting out there and talking to people, and more importantly, listening to people all across the state about what they're up against. And what they're up against is tough. It has been decades of costs of things going up, wages stuck, no solutions from government, no leadership, and government is not even, in my view, working for the people. And so, I think what we're talking about here and what we're seeing is a return to core values. People want their politics to be focused entirely on working for them again and coming up with solutions and answers to what we're going to do about our schools, what we're going to do about healthcare, what we're going to do to build a real economy where people can earn enough to make a living and afford a home and keep their family in this state. And that's what I want to work on as governor.
Final thought, Mr. Dickinson. Progressives on the move here in Rhode Island and nationally.
There's no question that some of those democratic values are very much in the spotlight, and there's some important specific things that we need to do. I'm not sure that we can't do it all under the umbrella of the Democratic Party. I'm a Democrat, and I've been a Democrat for a long time. I did not file or enter this race as my opponent across the table did as an independent and, go and go local prov and do a video explaining why it's a good idea to be an independent. And I didn't do what Gina Raimondo did and claim to be a Democrat and, in effect, spend $30,000 of New York John Arnold money trying to get me, Spencer Dickinson, defeated in 2012 by my Republican opponent. So, when I hear about people claiming to be a Democrat, I'm very skeptical. But we have basic Democratic Party values, and, I respect them. There's a lot of talking and consensus that is ahead of us. If I'm elected, I will work with whoever the new speaker is. I know many or most of the legislators, and we'll get some work done here.
Okay, it's time to move on. Final words of the debate. We're going to start with a closing statement. 1 minute, please. Spencer Dickinson.
So as I said earlier, I really appreciate what you're doing here, and I think this has been, I asked you to make it a debate between the candidates, and you've done that very effectively. I have huge admiration for you for doing that. It's not easy, and I think you've been fair. And if you're just tuning in, if you're riding in your car, I said that I think this is a job interview. And we're sitting around the table from, with the people that are interviewing us, which is the voters of the state of Rhode Island. And you have an opportunity to hire somebody, my opponent across the table there, who we can't be quite sure what his last job was or when he left it. Or you can hire me, who has been here fighting these issues in the legislature and, in effect, dealing with them as a resident of Rhode Island consistently for many, many years. I understand these issues. I would like to have this job. I'm asking you to put me to work for you because I understand these issues personally.
Thank you. Final word, Matt Brown.
Yeah, I am hopeful that we can change things in this state, and I'm hopeful because almost everyone agrees that this system isn't working. Middle-class people, working-class people, people of all backgrounds across the state agree that the system is not working for them and it needs to be changed. That gives me hope, because if we can get everyone together, this great majority of people, we can really change things. We can have a state that reflects our values. We can have a state where everyone can afford to go to the doctor without going broke. We can have a state where all of our children can get a quality education regardless of their background or their zip code. We can have a state where we can block this frack gas plant and be a leader in clean energy. This gas plant that Governor Raimondo has pushed for. We can have be a state where everyone has a job that pays well enough and a home that they can afford. We can do all of these things. All we need is new leadership that understands that the role of government is only one, and that's to look out for the people and only the people.
Matt Brown, former Secretary of State, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us as well. Former State Representative Spencer Dickinson.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again for joining us.
Excellent
We appreciate
job.
it. Thank you for listening. This is the second of our 3 WPRO Election Central debates. We'll be back next Wednesday, same time. This is the Democrats running for Lieutenant Governor. Join us. Thank you to the many people who have put together this program to help it get on the air. We appreciate it. We will see you next Wednesday. Dan York is going to have debate analysis coming up immediately after Paul Zangari has a news update. Good evening.